Blessing, why are you wearing my wedding ring? Grace, I can explain. Kenneth gave it to me to hold. I forgot to take it off. Kenneth does not give my ring to anybody. Not even to hold. Not for 1 hour, not for 1 day. Ask him yourself then.
Grace, calm down. It is not what you think.
Then tell me what it is, Kenneth. Tell me why my own sister is wearing the ring you placed on my finger in church, in front of our whole family.
We did not plan for this to happen.
Grace, I am sorry. I did not mean for it to go this far.
How far, Blessing? How far did it go?
Grace Adeyemi did not sleep the night before her sister arrived in Lagos. She lay awake in the bedroom she shared with her husband Kenneth, staring at the ceiling fan turning slow circles above her, thinking of Blessing's voice on the phone 3 days earlier, cracked and thin, saying her mother's burial had drained the last of her strength and she had nowhere left to go. Grace had not hesitated. Blood was blood. She woke Kenneth that same night to tell her her sister was coming, and he had only nodded and pulled her closer, telling her she was a good woman for opening her home to family in grief. By the time Blessing stepped out of the taxi outside their duplex in Lekki, thinner than Grace remembered, dressed in a faded black dress that still carried the dust of their mother's village, Grace had already been crying before she reached the gate. She wrapped her arms around her younger sister and held her the way she used to when they were children, sharing one mattress in Owerri, when their father was still alive and the world had not yet learned how to be cruel to them. "You will stay as long as you need," Grace told her that first night, setting a plate of jollof rice and fried plantain before her sister at the dining table, while Kenneth sat quietly at the head, watching the reunion with the soft, approving smile of a good husband. "This is your home too now, Blessing. Nothing has changed between us." Blessing looked up at her with eyes that seemed to hold both gratitude and something else, something Grace was too full of grief and love to notice yet. "Thank you, sister," Blessing said quietly. "I don't know what I would have done." For the first few weeks, it was everything Grace had hoped it would be. Blessing helped around the house, cooked breakfast before Grace woke, kept the compound clean, and slowly the color returned to her face. Grace watched her sister heal and felt something in her own chest settle, a quiet peace that came from doing right by family, from honoring the promise she had made at their mother's graveside to never let Blessing suffer alone in the world. Grace's own marriage to Kenneth had been built slowly, carefully, over 6 years of courtship before the wedding. 4 of them spent saving together for the plot of land in Lekki, where they eventually built the duplex she now called home. She had met him at a wedding in Enugu when she was 26, a quiet civil engineer with steady hands and a steadier voice, and she had loved him for the very things that now felt like they belonged to a stranger. His patience, his calm, the way he never raised his voice even when frustrated. Their own wedding had been modest but full of joy, held in a small church in Ikoyi with both families crowded into wooden pews, Blessing herself standing as one of the bridesmaids in a lavender gown, smiling so widely that day that Grace had cried simply from the fullness of having her baby sister beside her at the altar. It was that memory, more than any other, that made what was coming feel impossible to imagine, because the woman who once adjusted Grace's veil with trembling, joyful hands was not a woman Grace could picture ever wishing her harm. But peace in that house did not last. It began with small things, the kind of things a woman only notices when she's paying very close attention or when something in her spirit warns her before her mind understands why. Blessing began waking earlier, before Grace, to prepare Kenneth's breakfast herself, standing at the stove already dressed and perfumed, while Grace was still rubbing sleep from her eyes. She ironed his shirts without being asked, folded them exact the way he preferred, remembered his tea without sugar and his eggs without pepper, details Grace herself sometimes forget in the rush of her mornings at the bank, where she worked as a senior relationship officer. "Blessing has really settled in," Kenneth said one evening, loosening his tie as he sat on the edge of their bed. "She takes such good care of this house." "She is my sister," Grace said, smiling as she creamed her hands. Of course she would. She told herself it was nothing. She told herself gratitude simply looks like devotion, that a woman who had lost everything would naturally attach herself tightly to the family who took her in. She told herself these things through the months that followed. Through the evenings Blessing lingered too long in the sitting room after Grace had gone up to shower. Through the laughter that drifted up the staircase between her husband and her sister over jokes Grace was never told. Through the Saturday afternoons Blessing insisted on driving Kenneth to the market because Grace had a headache and needed to rest. There were other moments too. Small enough on their own to dismiss, but heavy when they gathered together in the back of Grace's mind. There was the evening she came home early from a training seminar in Victoria Island and found the sitting room silent the second her key turned in the lock. Blessing and Kenneth sitting a full sofa's length apart with the television volume too low to have actually been watched. There was the perfume, a new scent Blessing had started wearing that Grace once caught faintly on Kenneth's collar after a Saturday afternoon he claimed to have spent alone at the site inspecting a client's building. There was the way Blessing had begun to refer to the house as our home in conversations with the neighbors, a slip Grace corrected gently each time, telling herself her sister simply meant well, that grief made people cling to whatever safety they were offered. Grace's closest friend, Nkechi, visiting for Sunday lunch one week, pulled her aside in the kitchen and asked her carefully whether everything was well between her and her sister, whether Grace had noticed how Blessing looked at Kenneth when she thought no one else was watching. Grace had laughed the question away that day, embarrassed even to entertain such a thought about her own blood, and told Nkechi she was imagining things that were not there. She would remember that conversation many months later with a bitterness that never fully left her. It was a Thursday in the 6th month when Grace's world cracked open. She had gone to Reddington Hospital that morning for a minor procedure on her wrist, a small growth the doctor wanted removed before it worsened. Before they wheeled her into the theater, the nurse asked her to remove her jewelry, and Grace slipped off her wedding ring, the same gold band Kenneth had placed on her finger 4 years earlier in a church in Ikoyi, filled with both their families, and handed it to Kenneth for safekeeping, since he had come with her that morning, while Blessing stayed behind to prepare the house for her return. The procedure went smoothly. Grace came home that evening with her wrist bandaged, tired but relieved, expecting only rest and her husband's care. Instead, she found Blessing in the kitchen, and something on her sister's hand caught the kitchen light and stopped Grace's heart cold in her chest. It was her ring, her wedding ring, unmistakable, the one with the small inscription inside the band that read, "Grace and Kenneth forever," sitting comfortably on Blessing's finger as though it had always belonged there. "Blessing," Grace's voice came out smaller than she intended. "Why are you wearing my ring?" Blessing, the woman in a fitted green blouse, said, freezing mid-stir, "Kenneth gave it to me to hold. I forgot to take it off." Grace, the woman in hospital wristband and cardigan, said, stepping closer, voice trembling, "Kenneth does not give my ring to anybody, not even to hold." Blessing, the woman in a fitted green blouse, said, looking away, "Ask him yourself then." Grace, the woman in hospital wristband and cardigan, said, turning toward the staircase, "Kenneth? Kenneth, come down here now." Kenneth, the man in a half-buttoned white shirt, said, descending slowly, avoiding his eyes, "Grace, calm down. It is not what you think." Grace, the woman in hospital wristband and cardigan, said, holding up her bare hand, "Tell me what it is. Tell me why my sister is wearing the ring you put on my finger in church." Kenneth, the man in a half-buttoned white shirt, said, running his hand over his face, "We did not plan for this to happen." Blessing, the woman in a fitted green blouse, said, voice cracking, "Grace, I am sorry. I did not mean for it to go this far." Grace, the woman in hospital wristband and cardigan, said, backing away, breath shaking, "How far, Blessing? How far did it go?" The silence that followed answered her more completely than any words could have. Grace stood in the doorway of her own kitchen, in the home she had opened without hesitation to the sister she loved, and watched the two people she trusted most in the world refuse to look at her. It took 3 more days of quiet, careful digging for the full truth to surface, and each piece cut deeper than the last. Grace found the messages first, buried in a second phone Kenneth kept locked in his car's glove compartment. Months of tenderness exchanged between her husband and her sister, beginning barely 6 weeks after Blessing moved in. She found the hotel receipts next, dates that lined up exactly with the afternoons Blessing had claimed to be running errands in town. And on the 4th day, standing in the doorway of the guest room that had once been a sanctuary for her grieving sister, she found the small folded ultrasound printout tucked inside Blessing's Bible, dated 2 months earlier. Blessing was carrying Kenneth's child. Grace did not scream. She did not break a single plate or raise her hand against either of them, though every part of her body demanded it. She simply sat down at the dining table where she had once served her sister jollof rice with tears of joy in her eyes, and she asked one question, quiet and final. "How long have you both been planning to destroy me?" Neither of them had an answer worth giving. What followed was not chaos, but a cold, deliberate unraveling that Grace controlled from the very first hour. She called her elder brother in Owerri that same night and told her everything, calmly, without a single tear in her voice, because the tears had already been spent in private. She contacted her lawyer the next morning and began the process of separating every joint account, every property document, every asset she had built with Kenneth across their marriage, discovering along the way that she had contributed far more to their wealth than he had ever acknowledged. She packed Blessing's belongings herself, folded neatly into 2 suitcases, and left them by the gate with the same care she had used to prepare her sister's welcome home. By the following week, both Kenneth and Blessing were gone from the house in Lekki, and Grace changed every lock before the sun set that evening. Word of what happened traveled quickly through both families, the way such things always do, no matter how quietly a woman tries to carry her pain. Grace's mother's elder brothers, the aunties who had wept beside her at the burial only months earlier, called one after another to express their outrage, though Grace noticed how carefully some of them still asked after Blessing, as if wanting to preserve some path back for her. Kenneth's own mother, a proud woman from Onitsha who once praised Grace endlessly at family gatherings, called to apologize on her son's behalf, admitting through tears that she had raised him better than this, and that no explanation could excuse what he had done to a wife who had only shown him kindness. Grace listened to each call with the same even calm, thanking people for their concern, correcting no one, defending nothing, because she understood by then that the only opinion that mattered was the one she held of herself, and that opinion had not been shaken. At the bank, Grace's colleagues noticed a change in her that had nothing to do with sorrow. She arrived earlier, stayed later, closed larger accounts than she ever had before, throwing the full force of her hurt into the one part of her life that had never betrayed her. Her supervisor, a woman named Adaze, who had watched Grace's quiet competence for years, began recommending her for opportunities she had once been too cautious to pursue, and within 8 months, Grace was managing a portfolio 3 times the size of what she had handled before the scandal broke her marriage apart. The consequences did not long to find Kenneth and Blessing. Kenneth's business partners, several of whom Grace had personally cultivated relationships with through her position at the bank, began quietly withdrawing their confidence once whispers of the scandal reached the right ears in Lagos business circles. Within 4 months, his construction firm lost 2 major contracts, and the apartment he moved in with Blessing was a fraction of the comfort he had once enjoyed under Grace's roof and Grace's steady income. Blessing, for her part, discovered quickly that a man who betrays one woman rarely hesitates to disappoint another. Kenneth grew distant as the pregnancy advanced and his finances tightened, resentful of a child that had cost him everything, and by the time Blessing gave birth to a baby girl in a public hospital in Aja, Kenneth was already 3 weeks gone, having moved in with yet another woman he had met at a bar in Victoria Island. Blessing came to Grace's gate 8 months after the discovery. Thinner again, the way she had been the day she first arrived from the village. This time, with a newborn wrapped against her chest and nowhere else in the world to turn. The gateman called Grace to the window. Grace looked out at her sister standing in the sun, rocking a crying infant, and for a long moment she said nothing at all. "Grace, please," Blessing called out, her voice breaking against the gate. "I know I do not deserve it, but please, just help me this once. I have nowhere to go." Grace stepped out onto the veranda, arms folded, her face calm in a way that unsettled Blessing more than shouting ever could have. "You once told me this was your home too," Grace said quietly. "Do you remember that, Blessing? I told you nothing had changed between us, and I meant it. Nothing did change until you decided to change it yourself." "I was wrong. I was so wrong." "You were," Grace agreed. "And now you understand what it costs to take something that was never yours to take." She reached into her purse and pulled out an envelope, passing it through the gate. Enough money for a month's rent and nothing more. "This is not for you," Grace said. "This is for the child because she did not choose any of this. But do not come back to this gate again, Blessing. This chapter of my life is closed, and you closed it yourself the day you put my ring on your finger." She turned and walked back into the house that was fully hers again, past the wall where her wedding photograph with Kenneth had once hung, now replaced with a portrait of herself alone, taking the week her divorce was finalized, her chin lifted, her eyes clear, a woman who had rebuilt herself out of the wreckage her own sister had left behind. Grace never remarried, but she never needed to. Within 2 years, she had been promoted to head of her department at the bank, purchased a second property in Ikoyi entirely in her own name, and become something of a quiet legend among the women in her circle. The one who lost everything to betrayal and rebuilt a life twice as strong without ever raising her voice. And somewhere across the city, in a rented room far smaller than the home she once shared with her sister's trust, Blessing raised her daughter alone, carrying a wedding ring that had never truly been hers, a symbol now of everything she had destroyed and nothing she had ever gained. Sometimes, on quiet evenings, Grace would sit on her veranda in Lekki with a cup of tea, watching the sun fall behind the estate's tall gates, and she would think not of Kenneth, of Blessing, but of the promise she had made at their mother's graveside years before, the promise to protect her sister no matter what came. She understood now, with the clarity that only distance and time could bring, that protecting someone did not mean excusing them, and that love without boundaries was simply an open door for betrayal to walk through unchallenged. She had loved fully and given freely, and when that love was thrown back in her face, she had chosen not bitterness but discipline, rebuilding brick by brick a life that answered to no one but herself. The women in her building would later say that Grace Adeyemi was the calmest woman in Lekki, the one who never raised her voice, who greeted everyone with the same warm, steady smile, whether at church on Sunday or negotiating a corporate loan on a Tuesday afternoon. What they did not know, what only Grace carried within her, was that the calm had been earned through fire, through a betrayal that could have broken a weaker spirit entirely. She had survived not by forgetting what was done to her, but by refusing to let it define the rest of her story. Was Grace right to give Blessing money for the child but shut her out forever? Or should family always be forgiving no matter what? Drop your answer below. If this story touched you, please like and subscribe. Share it with someone who needs it today. And drop a comment. We want to hear from you. God bless you.